So what's it like to go on a trip abroad with my husband's money?
My sister-in-law, Betty, arrogantly declared.
I wonder how it feels to live not just off your parents, but also off your brother.
I retorted, feeling a surge of anger at her audacity. Well, you're one to talk. You're a stay-at-home wife, and yet you hire a maid and don't do any housework at all.
That's enough. Both of you, stop it.
My father stepped in between Betty and me as our argument threatened to escalate. With a calm look on his face, he pacified me and looked up at Betty.
Seems like you can't enjoy your trip with us both here. We'll head back home. Sorry for disturbing.
My name is Lisa. I'm nearing my 40s and work while living with my father. My mother passed away due to illness 10 years ago, and my younger brother Jake, who is 5 years younger, has already married and left home. I live modestly with my father in our spacious house. It's not that I can't afford to live alone. I choose to live with my father because I'm worried about him. After losing my mother, he started having frequent health issues and was forced to quit his job as he neared retirement. His condition worsened to the point where he wouldn't eat for days unless reminded, and would be bedridden for almost 2 weeks if he fell ill. I couldn't leave my father alone in such a state. At that time, my brother Jake was already working as a lawyer and had a fiancé. Jake and his wife were planning to build a new home near our house, so it was inevitable that I would stay with my father. Jake is exceptionally gifted compared to me. I never thought that the woman he chose as his wife would turn out to be so unreasonable. Jake's wife, Betty, quit her job immediately after their marriage and became a housewife. She leaves all household chores to a hired butler, and her daily routine seems to revolve around luxury lunches and shopping at high-end stores. Jake is busy with work. Perhaps he doesn't have much time to spend with Betty, but her extravagant lifestyle is shocking. Living close to Jake and Betty's house, I couldn't help but hear about Betty's carefree life. What made it more intolerable were her remarks when she visited our house.
When are you planning to leave this house, Lisa? Aren't you embarrassed to live at home at your age?
Betty would mock me like this quite often. I swallowed the words. I don't want to hear that from a housewife who doesn't do housework and just enjoys herself, and responded with a vague smile. I've gotten to the point where I wish she wouldn't come to our house at all, but my father shows sympathy towards Betty, saying,
Jake might be too busy, and she could be lonely. He doesn't drive her away. Rather, he often invites her to have dinner with us.
I wish Jake and my father would show some understanding of the emotional toll this is taking on me. But when I see my father, who is unbothered by Betty's audacious attitude, smiling while eating with her, I can't help but think that as long as he's happy, that's all that matters. Why on earth did Jake marry such a woman? I often wonder, but I suppose there are qualities in Betty that only Jake can appreciate. I purposely ignore Betty's rude remarks and continue eating in silence. That day, as usual, my father invited Betty to have dinner. Jake has been swamped with work lately, and Betty usually helps herself to food left by the housekeeper. My father, perhaps feeling pity for Betty, decided to buy some expensive ingredients and proposed that the three of us have a nice meal together. I wasn't particularly thrilled, but if my father insisted, I didn't have a choice. I bought ingredients from the supermarket in town and managed to whip up some dishes I'd never cooked before. My father, who had been losing his appetite, was delighted and laughed, saying,
I'm particularly hungry today.
Betty arrived significantly past the agreed-upon time, sank into the dining table chair without so much as a decent greeting. The dishes I had prepared were lined up in front of her.
Now that we're all here, let's eat,
my father cheerfully suggested. Betty didn't seem pleased. She poked at the food with her fork, heaved a big sigh, and said,
Do you think I can eat something that looks this unappetizing?
Betty shot me a look of contempt as she glanced at the small dishes. I stared back at Betty, then turned to my father in surprise. My father also looked surprised, his mouth agape as he looked at Betty.
Well, it may not be as good as the meals your housekeeper makes, but Lisa made this from scratch. Can't you be a bit more polite?
When my father-in-law sternly rebutted, Betty immediately pulled a sour face.
I never said I wanted to eat with you guys. I'm helping you make some memories, and you serve me something that looks so unappetizing. Can't you consider my feelings a bit?
What do you mean by making memories? I muttered, but Betty picked up on it quickly. Betty looked down on me and my father, smirked, and said something unthinkable.
Well, your father won't live much longer, right? I'm the diligent daughter-in-law keeping him company, so I expect a generous inheritance.
At this, both my father and I were left speechless. The living room fell silent. Could this really be the woman that the intelligent Jake chose to marry? Discussing inheritance before someone's even passed away? There's something wrong with that. Dad, you're going to live for many more decades. Before I knew it, I was shouting. Even Betty, who had been grumpily picking at her gratin, stopped when she saw me letting my anger out. Don't talk about inheritance. To you, Dad may be just another person, but he's family to me. He's also the same to Jake. He's the only living relative left for us who lost our mother. My father gently held me back as I leaned over the table. Panting heavily, I slowly sat back down. My anger towards Betty was still swirling inside my chest. With a deep breath that seemed to pierce my father's mood, I felt my pent-up emotions deflate.
I'll pretend I didn't hear what you just said,
my father said in an emotionless voice. Immediately, Betty's scoff came flying.
All I did was state the facts. I don't want the inheritance taken away by a woman who's still living in her parents' house.
Betty's words were so refreshingly straightforward, I no longer had the energy to be angry. She bravely rehashed what my father had tried to let slide, and threw her demeaning words and actions at us.
I'll leave this rundown house to you, sister-in-law. Looks like you won't be losing your place to live.
Betty's shrill laughter echoed. I wanted to retaliate with a complaint, but when I saw my father quietly shaking his head, I swallowed my words. My father was too lenient with Betty. Even though she might be lonely with Jake, often busy with work, it's not right to sympathize with an adult who can't tell what's appropriate to say and what's not. My father looked at my face and muttered softly,
She's the one Jake chose.
My father smiled with a hint of sadness. He looked like a father dealing with a troublesome daughter, and also like a man completely worn out by life. I couldn't say anything when I saw my father's face. I had things to say to both my father and Betty, but I wanted to know what Jake thought about all this more than anything. Does Jake know about Betty's behavior? If he's aware of it and just letting it slide, I have to say something as his sister. In the end, Betty barely touched the food I made and left early after a brief conversation. Only my father and I were left in the large living room.
Creating memories, huh? Maybe she's right.
I quietly exhaled as I noticed my father's figure suddenly seeming smaller when he murmured that. Due to Jake's suggestion, our family decided to go on a trip to France. My father wanted to go to France while he could still walk on his own, so Jake and I planned the trip. Of course, I initially asked Jake to take Dad and go on the trip with just the three of them, without me. Betty would always make snide comments toward me if I was present. I didn't want to ruin the cheerful atmosphere of the trip. However, Jake insisted that it would be best to have someone who usually observes Father's condition, so he ended up purchasing 4 tickets. I reluctantly agreed to accompany them on the trip to France, and as I expected, Betty was in a bad mood the whole time and didn't exchange a single word with anyone on the plane. Once we landed, we went straight to the heart of Paris and enjoyed sightseeing. My father was unbelievably energetic, exploring everywhere. Betty seemed to lighten up a bit when Jake bought her a brand-name bag. She walked arm in arm with Jake, but I couldn't help but notice that Jake didn't look particularly happy. At that moment, I accidentally made eye contact with Betty. She glared at me so fiercely that my heart jumped.
By the way, why is Lisa here with us?
Betty let go of Jake's arm and confronted me.
I asked her to come, in case something happens to Dad. We need someone who can handle it.
Jake tried to step in to help, but it seemed like his words didn't reach Betty. She kept staring at me, snickering.
What's it like to go on a trip overseas with my husband's money? Airfare isn't cheap, so don't be extravagant,
Betty said arrogantly.
We're staying in a suite at the hotel, but it would be fine for Lisa to sleep outside, right?
Jake called Betty's name sharply, trying to stop her, but she didn't listen.
How does it feel to live not only off your parents, but also off your brother?
I felt the blood rush to my head at that comment. Betty, you're the one living off Jake. Even though you're a housewife, you hired a housemaid and don't do any housework.
Enough. Both of you, stop it.
My father intervened just as Betty and I were about to get into a quarrel. With a serene expression, Dad calmed me down, glancing at Betty.
It seems our presence is spoiling your trip. We'll go home. Sorry for disturbing you. Lisa, could you check the bus schedule to the airport?
Without anger or distress, he calmly made his declaration. A smile spread across Betty's face, while a look of panic raced across Jake's.
Wait a minute. What should we do when you guys are gone?
Jake had a sudden realization and tried desperately to keep us from leaving. However, once Dad decided to go home, his resolution was firm. He had me check the bus to the airport, and he quickly set off in the opposite direction towards the bus stop. I had no choice but to follow Dad, while keeping an eye on my brother and his wife.
We'll be just fine without the old man and old lady.
Betty's voice echoed from behind us. I was momentarily angered at Betty treating Dad as an old man, but I had no time to waste on her. I chased after Dad, who was walking ahead, while hearing Jake's cries of anguish and Betty's insults thrown at him. Jake barged into the cafe near the airport where we were having tea, looking desperate. His forehead was covered in an extraordinary amount of sweat, signaling something was amiss. In a frenzy, Jake rushed to our table and bowed his head to us.
I'm sorry about earlier. I'll apologize properly later, but for now, I need help with Betty.
Jake bowed deeply, pleading with Dad. Dad and I looked at each other in surprise. What happened to Betty? When I asked in place of Dad, Jake began to explain with renewed energy what happened after we left. After we boarded the bus to the airport, Jake and Betty took a taxi to the hotel. The problem occurred after they got in the taxi. The English that worked at the tourist spots didn't seem to work with the taxi driver. Neither of them spoke French, and they couldn't understand what the driver was saying. The driver was asking them something, but they responded without really understanding. As a result, Jake said that when he paid the money and got off, the driver drove away with Betty still inside.
I can't get through to Betty on the phone. She might have been mugged or something after she was dropped off,
Jake said, his face turning pale, probably figuring it would be faster to rely on us rather than trying to cope on his own, and winding up out of his depth. Jake, who doesn't understand French, asked for our help. My father and I can speak French perfectly. Betty appears to think of my father as an old man who can't do anything, but he used to be a French teacher. And I, too, am a current French teacher. This trip to France was planned by Jake, wanting my father to reminisce about his youth. Once my father arrived in France, he seemed filled with nostalgia and vitality, perhaps remembering his time studying abroad. Since I, too, had studied abroad in France during my student days, after parting ways with my brother and his wife, we slowly talked about our time studying here. My father listened to the stories with a serious expression and eventually gave a slow nod.
Let's return to the city center. I bet the taxi that dropped you guys off is waiting for its next fare there.
With my father's command, we quickly got ready and set off on a journey to find Betty, who had been left somewhere. My father and I split up to look for the taxi that had dropped off my brother and his wife after returning to the city center. Most taxi drivers speak French without resorting to English. Before me, my father found the taxi that had taken them and quickly arrived at the location where Betty was said to have been dropped off. Fortunately, Betty was there, exactly where she had been dropped off, unhurt, slumped over. It was good that she was uninjured, but as soon as she arrived, she seemed to have been pickpocketed, and all her bags and valuables were gone, leaving her sitting there penniless. When Betty saw Jake's face, tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly scowled when she saw us.
What are they doing here?
Betty, who was plainly grumpy, asked Jake, and he sighed heavily.
If it weren't for the two of them, you'd have been left here penniless forever, you know. Show some gratitude.
Betty's eyes rounded in doubt.
What do you mean? Without them, our trip would have been a disaster. You and I, we can't speak French. That's why we ended up like this. But these two are different. Both are French teachers, far better than me.
Betty looked uncomfortable, her gaze flitting over to us. A bad thought sprouted in me, and I dropped the quiet words to Betty. If we hadn't found you, you might have been sleeping rough here. Betty bit her lip in frustration. And also, the expenses for the trip were split equally between Jake and me. How's that? An overseas trip fully enjoyed on the money of an old lady living at her parents'? At this, Betty's shoulders began to shake.
It's your father's money anyway, isn't it?
To Betty's counter-argument, my father gently shook his head.
I didn't do anything. Lisa and Jake, they're doing well on their own. They're my pride and joy.
Just when I thought Betty was glaring at me intently, she fell silent without saying a word. Even though she had been helped, she didn't utter a single word of thanks. I had a mountain of things I wanted to say to her, but my father whispering, "Take it easy," made me hold back and keep my mouth shut. For Betty, this must have been an incredibly humiliating event. She must not have expected to be saved by the one she had been looking down upon. Even Jake seemed fed up with Betty's stubborn antagonism towards us, his face showing clear signs of frustration.
Well, now that the issue has been resolved, shall we resume sightseeing? Let's go to a restaurant I used to frequent when I was studying here.
My father suggested cheerfully. At my father's bright words, the family was once again united. We ignored the depressed Betty and thoroughly enjoyed our trip in France. Upon our return to the States, Jake was constantly apologizing to us, and he surprisingly and abruptly divorced Betty. Shocked, I asked him why they had married in the first place. Apparently, Jake had married Betty because she claimed to be pregnant and insisted he take responsibility. After they married, it turned out that her claim of being pregnant was a lie. However, Jake said he couldn't easily file for divorce due to concerns about his public image. However, his patience with Betty, who looked down on my father and me, had run its course, leading him to decide on the divorce. After the divorce, Betty was kicked out of their new home and couldn't continue her life as a housewife anymore. Of course, there was no maid to take care of the housework for her. What's more, due to a pickpocket incident during our trip to France, Betty ended up losing half her assets. She must be working hard, breaking a sweat by now. My father, remembering his younger days during our trip to France, became noticeably more cheerful and lively. I quit my long-term teaching job at school and am now busy running a French language school at home after some renovations. I'm hoping that my father will also teach French in our school someday. Our dreams as a family continue to expand.
I'm housing you? You're letting me live here? For a measly sum? The words from my husband make my mouth twitch in annoyance. That's right. You do no housework, sleep for 5 hours, and you're just squatting in Denise's house. You're like the black sheep of the family. Why don't you just leave? Black sheep, huh? Who's the real black sheep here? A subtle smile escapes my tightened lips. At my mother-in-law's words, I just don't care anymore. Is that so? Well, if you insist, I'll take my leave. That was the last time I saw my mother-in-law and husband. My name is Carleen McAvee. I'm 32 and work for a certain company in Boston. It's a pretty big company. Work there earnestly for a decade and you'll be in a respectable position with a decent income. 2 years ago, I also married Dennis, who works for a similar-sized company. We live in a newly built house. It must seem like smooth sailing to everyone around us. I met Dennis, who's a year older, through a friend's introduction. First impression? He seemed sincere. He often talked about his mother, and I liked that he valued family. We didn't have a fiery romantic start, but we kinda started dating and then kinda got married. Even after marriage, we had no children because we both needed to continue working. We lived in a house too big for just the two of us, enjoying a comfortable newlywed life. Because we're both working, we often missed each other. However, we made sure to value the time we spent together and we had no financial problems. I thought we were doing well. Well, until now. Unlike me, who's lived alone since starting college, Dennis lived with his parents until just before our marriage. Born and raised in Boston, both his college and current workplace are not far away from his family home. I only know his late father through photos. Dennis was still in high school when his father passed away. Probably, he didn't want to leave his mother alone. I met that mother-in-law for the first time at a dinner arranged for both families to meet. Dennis had told me his mother was about the same age as my own, but she looked much younger. A truly beautiful woman. Nice to meet you, Carleen. My son speaks so highly of you. Please take good care of him. Mother-in-law smiled warmly as she spoke, and I couldn't sense any of the hardship she must have endured after losing her husband. Nice to meet you too, mother-in-law. I'm looking forward to becoming a family. I remember feeling relieved, thinking that this person and I might actually build a good family relationship together. Our home seemed to promise a fulfilling future, always filled with laughter and warmth. Both my parents and my mother-in-law were fully supportive of our marriage, and the preparations moved along surprisingly smoothly. We set the date for the wedding, and our house under construction was nearly complete. Before embarking on our married life, we made some decisions. We agreed we'd both work for a while, so we needed to pre-plan on chores, taking care of mother-in-law, and financial matters. Firstly, chores would be handled by whoever was available at the time. Then, regarding mother-in-law, she was still healthy and had father-in-law's inheritance, so she wouldn't struggle financially. We decided it'd be best if we lived separately. Up to this point, all was good. But then came the issue of money. I thought splitting all expenses, including the mortgage, would be fair. Dennis had different ideas. Dennis proposed that I handle the mortgage payments while he takes care of other living expenses. This gave me pause. I had heard of couples splitting everything or pooling resources, but Dennis's suggestion was unusual. The monthly mortgage alone is $2,700. I had thought from the beginning that this was too heavy a burden. The 3-story house was too big, even if we were to have children. and the large property, mostly chosen by Dennis, seemed daunting to manage. Looking back, I realized I'd already made several wrong choices, but I wasn't thinking clearly at the time. I didn't want any financial disagreements before marriage, so I convinced myself to agree with Dennis's proposal. In addition to the mortgage, there are other costs like groceries, utility bills, and taxes. I had no idea how much I would regret that decision later on. Every month, we put all our payments into a joint account in Dennis's name. This includes the mortgage, living expenses, travel costs, and future savings. The monthly withdrawals are hefty, but we're both high earners to begin with. Given our busy work schedules and limited time off, the joint account should have been continually growing. Why isn't there as much money as I expected? I stumbled upon it by chance. I casually opened our savings book to see how much we had saved up, wondering if we had some major expenses. I couldn't recall anything significant. That left the possibility that Dennis might have spent on something, but he didn't mention anything during our last family meeting. We both have busy work schedules. I leave before Dennis wakes up and he comes home after I've gone to bed. So, we often don't get to talk much, even though we live together. To break through this disconnect, we started having regular family meetings. We discuss big financial decisions like how to spend our savings and future travel plans. We just had a family meeting a few days ago. Seeing our savings dwindle without hearing anything about it at the meeting is odd. Huh? I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Scanning through the latest transactions, I realized Dennis hadn't transferred his share of the living expenses for this month. I glanced at the calendar. It's been 3 days since payday. We're supposed to contribute our share by then. Maybe he just forgot? Dennis was coming home late today. I'll ask him gently tomorrow, I thought, and then forgot all about it. I didn't remember until 3 months later. Come to think of it, I never actually checked. Did he make the transfer like he was supposed to? With that thought, I opened the drawer in our living room TV stand and pull out the bank book for our joint account, which is under Dennis's name. I flip through the pages and my eyes widen. What's going on here? The balance had decreased even more since last time. A growing sense of distrust fills me. I can hear my own heartbeat ringing in my ears. A sinking feeling crosses my mind, and with trembling fingers, I flip the pages back. My worst fears are confirmed. You've got to be kidding me. Household expenses haven't been transferred for 3 months. Dennis didn't come home until late that night, and we missed each other the next morning. I couldn't confront him due to our conflicting schedules and my growing unease. Finally, I catch him on the weekend and declare that we're having an emergency family meeting. Dennis reluctantly sits on the living room sofa and looks at me. His face is serious, as if he knows I've discovered the truth. You know what this is about, don't you? As much as I wanted to explode in anger, I started the conversation as calmly as possible. Dennis nods quietly. Why haven't the household expenses been paid for the last 3 months? The truth is, what Dennis told me was beyond anything I could have imagined. To cut to the chase, Dennis had quit his job without telling me. This all started 4 months ago. My coworker got promoted before me. Can you believe it? A guy less competent than me. The boss is clueless. The company's a mess. What's the point of staying at a place that can't even evaluate people properly? I was stunned. I couldn't find the words to respond. Sure, it's frustrating to be surpassed by a coworker. I get that. But we have a family, and we just built our house. Shouldn't you secure another job before quitting? Isn't that just common sense? I thought he was a man of integrity. That's why I married him. I don't know this man who speaks so foully. So what's the plan? You are going to find another job, right? Of course. I want to show them. I'm planning to get a job at an even bigger company, so cover our living expenses till then. Dennis seemed unfazed, like he didn't grasp the gravity of the situation. He didn't even apologize. Not that I need an apology, but the sense of betrayal was overwhelming. Everyone has times when they're unhappy at work and want to quit. I don't love my job every single day either. What hurt most was that he didn't even consult me first. So I agreed to cover the expenses, but only for a short time. Dennis seemed to be actively job hunting while I was at work. Initially, I thought it would be fine. There were job magazines on our living room table. I figured he'd find something soon. But months passed, and I began to realize I had been too optimistic. A year went by, and Dennis still hadn't found a job. You've been supporting me for a year now. Can't you just keep doing it? You're the one with a stable income anyway. I was already struggling with a mortgage. The cost of living was piling up, making me work harder than ever before. I willingly took on overtime and even worked weekends. I barely had time to breathe, let alone handle chores, and I was sleep deprived and disoriented. I almost fainted on the train to work today. Dennis's offhand comment didn't sound like a joke to me, and even if it were, I couldn't take it that way. What was the point of our marriage, of me working so hard? I began to lose sight of everything. I'm going out, I mumbled, knowing Dennis probably wouldn't hear me, and headed for the door. Today is another work day. I have to make money no matter what. Dragging my feet to work, that's how I get through. Surviving the day on willpower alone, I finally head home, more exhausted than when the day started. It's already past 10 p.m. and it's dark outside. I'm home. As I push the door open, I notice something unfamiliar in the entranceway. A pile of cardboard boxes. What's this? They're too old and sloppily packed to be delivery boxes. Just then, the living room door opened, and Dennis appeared, his face covered in stubble. Oh, those? They're from my mom. She was having a hard time living alone, so we decided she should move in with us. What? I didn't hear anything about this. My anger surged. Living together? What on earth is he talking about? Ever since he quit his job without telling me, I've had no idea what he's thinking. I used to worry about his mother living alone, and I even thought we could have a good family relationship. But I didn't know it at the time, that my seemingly cheerful and pleasant mother-in-law would turn out to be a real piece of work. The same could be said for my husband, too. What are you talking about? She's my mother. Helping her is a given. Are you stupid or something? That's the vibe I got. At this point, my opinion doesn't matter anymore. I've had enough of understanding this through my married life. A few days later, my mother-in-law showed up with a big grin. She hugged Dennis at the front door and gave me a sarcastic smile. Oh, Carlene, you're here. I heard you were always busy with work, so I assumed you wouldn't be around." The words, "You probably don't do much housework, do you?" cracked my already fragile heart even more. My malevolent mother-in-law and my unemployed husband Dennis. I couldn't see any hope for the future. Life with my mother-in-law was harder than I had ever imagined. When I'd get home late from work, she'd snark, "What are you doing? Not taking care of the house. You're failing as a wife." Dennis, far from defending me, would add insult to injury. "I'm letting you live in my house, so at least do the housework." How easy it would have been to say, "You're not working, so why don't you do it?" But no, that would only lead to more insults and emotional wounds. I didn't even have the energy to argue back anymore. My mother-in-law would just loaf around the house all day and never do any housework, as if it's the norm. Dennis had become so entitled to being taken care of that job listing magazines had disappeared from our living room. The only thing I could do while dealing with these two burdens was to work relentlessly. I needed money to live. More than that, while engrossed in my job, I could forget the harsh reality. People around me probably found it strange to see me more focused on work than I was before getting married, despite not being married for very long. Occasionally, I felt concerned glances my way, but I was grateful they didn't say anything. If someone shows me kindness now, I'm afraid I won't be able to go on. Long days of working late, catching the last train home, squeezing in just 5 hours of sleep and then heading back to the office as soon as dawn breaks. At this point, weekdays and weekends don't even matter. But I do plan on taking a half day off sometime this weekend. And the fact that I have to use that precious half day for a family meeting to tell those two that we can't continue living like this, especially when my savings keep dwindling, almost breaks me. I knew my mother-in-law was constantly ordering food delivery, but recently, even Dennis has been joining in. They've been indulging in steak and caviar during the day. What's worse, they've even been taking trips together. For now, they're just day trips, but it could escalate to international travel. I used to put extra money into our joint account, but now that I've realized how much they're spending, I only transfer just enough to cover the monthly withdrawals. In other words, if they keep up this spending, payments will start falling behind, leading to a worst-case scenario. So here we are, the three of us gathered in the living room over the weekend. The two of them, now shadows of their former friendly and genuine selves, are glaring at the papers I've spread out on the coffee table. "What's the meaning of this, Carlene? What are you trying to say with all this paperwork?" My mother-in-law squints up at me. "It's a breakdown of our income and expenses. We can't continue living like this." "I told you I'll pay it back when I get a job. Just hold on a bit. And the mortgage is just a measly $2,700. I'm letting you live in my house, so don't make a fuss over such a measly sum." My house? You're letting me live here? Measly sum? Words I can't ignore make my lips twitch. "That's right. You're the black sheep here, sleeping 5 hours a day, not doing any housework, and living in Dennis's house. Why don't you just leave?" Black sheep? Who's the real black sheep here? A laugh escapes my tightened lips. At my mother-in-law's words, everything suddenly becomes inconsequential. Or maybe, just maybe, I finally realized that there was never any need to try so hard. All right, no more bending over backward. Not for these people. I felt like a weight had lifted from my body and soul. Is that okay? Well then, I'll take you up on that and leave. My voice echoed in the once quiet living room. I must be smiling more than I ever have before.
Huh?
What? Both of them looked stunned, their eyes glued to the coffee table. What I smoothly pulled off and placed on top of the papers was a bundle of divorce papers. Of course, they were already filled out and stamped by me. Here, you sign it too. It'll make your mom feel more secure, won't it? Mumbling, Dennis picked up the pen from the table. He hesitated for a moment, but was encouraged by his gleeful mother to sign. I'll be moving out within this month. Don't worry, I'll submit these papers to the court immediately after the move.
Fine. Goodbye, black sheep.
Whatever they called me, my heart was unshaken. 2 weeks later, the day had finally come. The weather was perfect, and a pleasant breeze was blowing. It was the perfect day to start a new life. I need this and that move too. Yes, everything. As I instructed the movers, I was bustling around what had become someone else's home. After all, I had to move everything that was purchased with my money or had a receipt in my name. Hey, you're taking the coffee table, the sofa, and even the TV? You're stripping the living room bare.
Such a sneaky cat thief.
They were both following me around shouting. To be honest, they were just in the way. If you say this house under your name is yours, then all of this stuff paid for by me is mine, right? I finished my last set of instructions, let out a sigh, and turned around. The two of them fell silent at my words, looking at me bewildered. I glanced at them and turned on my heel. Well then, goodbye. That was the last time I saw both of them. I completed the move without any issues and immediately submitted the divorce papers. They were promptly accepted, and I was free. Not having to share mortgage payments or contribute to a joint account was a relief, and I was surprised at how much money I had left over. I never realized I was earning this much. Over the past year, paydays had been depressing. I was genuinely shocked when I realized my monthly payments. Later I found out what happened to my ex-husband Dennis and my former mother-in-law after I left them. Because they lost me as the breadwinner, they started falling behind on all their bills. Demand letters started piling up at their home. Dennis, ever so proud, ignored all of it. He didn't consult with the bank or the IRS. Eventually, they were faced with the demands for a lump sum payment. Unable to pay, Dennis borrowed money from a loan shark to cover it. But that wasn't the end of their problems. Realizing you can't avoid repaying loan sharks, Dennis finally swallowed his pride and started doing manual labor at a low-paying job. Had it not been for his period of unemployment, he could have found a more decent job. But that's none of my business now. As for mother-in-law, her pension wasn't enough to live on, so she started working a part-time job. She's now a cashier and has a reputation as the lady who can't do her job right. Not surprising for someone who was ungrateful, never worked, and just ordered food delivery all the time. But again, that's none of my business. As for me, I'm enjoying my single life. My skin has improved, and even I can tell that my expression has softened. People tell me I smile more now and that I've become more attractive. I hardly do any overtime work, and I can fully relax on weekends. I even have time to enjoy my hobbies. My life is just like it was before marriage. But because my married life was so miserable, Everything now feels incredibly wonderful. I've also been getting along well with a popular guy at work. He had been interested in me for a while, but hesitated to approach me because I was married. Anyway, life is smooth sailing this time around, that's for sure. I am feeling great today.
I'm thinking of getting married, and she wants to live here with you, Mom. His words left me shocked, twice. First, my son's wedding announcement of getting married. He, who had just turned 40 this year, had been whining about not having a girlfriend, even in front of me. Second, it was unusual these days for a bride to be positive about living with her mother-in-law. Up until then, my son and I had been living together in this 2-bedroom apartment. My husband passed away from overwork before my son entered elementary school. Ever since then, my son and I had been supporting each other. My son was still a young child, but he tried his best to support me, even cooking dinner for me as I was working tirelessly day and night. Even after he grew up and started working, my son did not leave home as he was always concerned about me. He cared and didn't want me to be living alone and lonely. I had mixed feelings about him. It was then that he announced his will to get married. You don't have to worry about me. Why don't you look for a house where you can live as a couple without interruption? I somehow felt anxious about living with a daughter-in-law. Before moving to this apartment, I had lived with my husband's parents at their house. Living together was really tough. I was nagged at by my mother-in-law, and my father-in-law ordered me around with loads of chores on a daily basis. As a result, I collapsed within a year of marriage and had days when I could not even get out of bed. My mother-in-law tried to force me out of bed and make me do the housework. I got so scared that I confessed everything to my husband. My husband was genuinely worried about me and decided to leave his parents' house with me.
What kind of daughter-in-law are you, trying to steal our precious son? You can leave by yourself.
My mother-in-law continued to rant until the last minute before we moved out. My husband turned his back on his parents and brought me to the apartment where we live now. That's why I couldn't agree to live with my son and his wife. No matter how friendly you try to be, your daughter-in-law is still a stranger. Living together will definitely cause frustrations. I knew from my bitter experience with my in-laws how hard it would really be to endure such a life. Knowing that, I was hesitant to live with my daughter-in-law. Seeing my hesitation, my son decided to bring the girl who would be his wife to our home. He wanted me to see what kind of person she was.
Nice to meet you. I hope we can get along.
She was 20 years old, much younger than my son. She was a very quiet girl, nervously keeping her eyes cast down. I couldn't help but wonder, how did such a young girl meet my son and decide to marry him? I couldn't stop wondering. Seeing my confused expression, my son, with a bashful smile, began to explain how they met. He's an instructor at a driving school, and she was one of his students, it seems. At that driving school, most instructors are pretty strict, but he was really kind, and before I knew it, I fell for him. She shyly explained her reasons for falling for my son. Upon hearing this, my son turned beet red. At first, I was surprised, but seeing the happiness on my son's face, I felt like crying. Finally, a woman had appeared who could support my son. You say you want to live with us. Are you really sure? If you need financial help, I can assist. Fortunately, I have some savings. If it can support my son and her in their happiness, I want to help as much as possible. I proposed this sincerely, but she shook her head vigorously.
If you're okay with it, I really want to live together. I want to help out, to pay back for all the hard work you've done.
What a kind-hearted girl she was. Not only did she care for my son, but she also cared about me, her future mother-in-law. I was both surprised and touched. With her, I thought maybe we could make it work, living under the same roof. Before I knew it, I found myself nodding in agreement. And so, my son and she got married, and we all started living together in our apartment. But the new bride turned out to be a surprising character. Just a week into our shared living, I began to feel a sense of
unease. "Mother-in-law, let me do all the housework. You take it easy." I had thought she would continue to work even after we lived together, but apparently she hadn't been working even before the marriage, and there was no sign of her getting a job. She did do the housework, but the laundry was sloppy, and frankly her cooking was not so great. But I felt if I said anything, she might take me as a nagging, difficult mother-in-law, so I chose to bear with it. Wanting to lighten her load a little, I said, "Thank you for always cooking. Let me handle dinner today. Why don't you take a break?" But she refused flatly.
"No, I'll do it. Please don't take my work away from me."
She stubbornly refused. So the moment we decided to live together, I was no longer able to step into my own kitchen. Even when I tried to help out with the cleaning and took out the vacuum cleaner, she snatched it away from me with a slightly irritated look on her face.
"So, listen, mother-in-law. I've told you. It's my job. Please, just stay out of it."
Her attitude was drastically different from the one she had shown when we first met after the wedding, and I found myself utterly bewildered. My son, wanting to provide for his wife and me, started working a part-time job at night, in addition to his full-time job during the day. This meant he often came home late, leaving her and me alone in the house for long stretches of time. She complained about virtually everything I did, which led me to retreat into my bedroom more and more. Whenever I'd emerge out to go to the restroom, I'd find her relaxing in the living room, nonchalantly watching TV. I felt incredibly uncomfortable in my own home, and I couldn't help but sigh quietly to myself. But that was not all. At one point, my son said something that took me completely by surprise. "Mom, don't you think you're making her work a little too hard? It's not fair to make her do all the housework." "What?" I exclaimed in surprise, raising my voice involuntarily. My son was looking at me with a grimace as if I was the villain. Despite telling me to do nothing, she had been playing the victim and complaining to my son. "I'm not making her do anything. She said she would do all the housework." "Well, she is your daughter-in-law. She's obviously trying to be respectful to you. You should appreciate her more. It's not fair to her. She's so young." I was perplexed by my son's logic, that her youth was a cause for sympathy, and to be honest, I was hurt that he wouldn't believe my side of the story. Since then, I'd had to constantly be on my toes around her. However, she would always misinterpret my actions, and I ended up constantly troubled and distressed. Still, I would occasionally say, "Thank you for everything you do. I'll take care of things around the house today. Why don't you go out and relax?" But her responses were always along the lines of,
"Are you trying to say that I'm in the way when I'm home? I'm going to have dinner with my husband, so you should eat first, mother-in-law."
Unbeknownst to my son, who came home late, I found myself eating alone in my bedroom. The silence of my bedroom with no television made me feel incredibly lonely. I could hear her laughing at the TV show in the living room. I began to fear that I would forever be treated as an intruder in this home. This went on for almost a year. One day, after I finished eating in my room as usual, I headed to the kitchen to wash the dishes. I quickly averted my gaze from the living room, which had been completely redecorated to suit my daughter-in-law's taste, and began to wash the dishes in a hurry. Suddenly my eyes caught my daughter-in-law, who was relaxing on the sofa, slowly rising to her feet.
"Excuse me, could you stop it already?"
Her first words left me speechless. As I turned my head in confusion, she bared her teeth at me.
"Don't play dumb," she exclaimed. "Your late husband built this apartment, right? I found that out while cleaning up your room the other day. You must have substantial savings from the rental income. Why are you letting my husband work while you just laze around at home?"
Indeed, this apartment, where 8 families, including us, reside, was built by my late husband for our living. My husband was a good businessman running a company, and he made a bold decision to separate our living room from his parents. I lost my mother at an early age, and my father was happily living with his second wife. So at the time, my husband was my only source of support. "Even if something happens to me, I won't let you struggle." He built this apartment so that I could live a stable life for the rest of my life. As long as there are tenants, there is a steady income. Nevertheless, the reason our son works is that he wants to be independent. My son, who now has a wife, is trying to provide for his family in his own way, However, it seems that his wife misunderstands that I am causing him to struggle because I am here. The words of my daughter-in-law continued. Eventually, mothers who can't let go of their children are totally dependent on them financially, right? To be frank, it's annoying. And unemployed, living on a pension, like you, is hindering our life. If you care about your son, please leave this apartment. I couldn't understand what my daughter-in-law was saying at all. In the first place, wasn't it you who wanted to live together? I have no idea when I have ever clung to my son. If it's hard for you to say, I'll tell him directly. The apartment and inheritance from your late husband are his, so I'm sure he'll get you into a good nursing home. Ignoring my defiant daughter-in-law for a moment, I finished the dishes, and then there was only one thing I wanted to say. Listen, you seem to be misunderstanding something, but the landlord here is not my son. Huh? At her somewhat stupid voice, I sighed internally and continued. Listen well. First of all, thank you for cleaning my room, but did you rummage through my things without permission? The property deed of the apartment was in the back of the drawer. My daughter-in-law's shoulders trembled. Even if she's family, rummaging through my belongings is a criminal act. You're the bad one for hiding what he should have. Why do you have it? Well, because I'm the owner. That's a lie. He said he was the owner. To quiet my daughter-in-law, I showed her the deed of the apartment. Look, my name's on it. It's not his. She was speechless. Just then, my son returned home at the perfect time. Sensing the tension in the room, he seemed panicked, too. His wife, with a great deal of aggression, thrust the apartment deed at him. Hey, weren't you saying you're the owner of this apartment? How do you explain this? My son, left stunned by his wife's intense fury, finally looking guilty, he responded, I'm sorry. I just wanted to impress you a bit. I wanted you to say, wow. It seemed like he lied a small lie, hoping to get some praise from his wife. Actually, when I eventually pass away, the apartment will indeed be his, so he wasn't entirely wrong. We've been patient all this time, haven't we? Let's make you the owner now, and have your mother move into a nursing home. That way everyone will be happy, don't you think? Nursing home? But... Our son tried to object, but his wife's momentum was unstoppable. We've struggled through living together when we didn't even want to. Isn't it time we got a reward? I knew it. She never really wanted to live with me, it seems. She was trying to flatter me and make a good impression, but in the end, she found me too much of a nuisance. My son seemed conflicted for a while, caught in the argument between his wife and me, but eventually turned to me. Mom, I'm sorry. I'll find you a good nursing home, I promise. I won't let you suffer. So, could you give this apartment to me? Apparently, my son had decided to side with his wife. Well, I guess it can't be helped. Husbands should prioritize their wives. But I too have endured a lot over the past year. I have no intention of meekly moving into a nursing home. Fine. I'll transfer the ownership of this apartment to you. Do what you wish. But I'm choosing my new place myself. I said just that and returned to my bedroom. I could hear the triumphant voice of my daughter-in-law from the other side of the door. We did it! Now we can finally become the owners of this apartment. I could also hear my son's voice echoing his wife's excitement. I could feel the days of hard work with my son crumble like a house of cards, but I couldn't afford to be downcast. I decided to make my next move. Several days later, I transferred the ownership of the apartment to my son as promised, and decided to leave the apartment immediately. I kept my new place of residence a secret. Mom, thank you so much. I'll do my best from here on out. Thank you so much. We're going to be happy together. My son and his wife saw me off, cheerful as always. I bade them farewell with a forced smile. I moved into a condominium with nursing care services. It had a view of the mountains and the sea, a dream my late husband and I had. The spacious and comfortable environment, without creaking floors, like the old apartment, and the vast view seemed to cleanse my soul. Just then, a call came in on my mobile phone. It was from my son. When I answered, a voice filled with rage reached my ears. Mom, what the hell? The apartment has a severe termite infestation. They say it needs to be rebuilt. Just as I thought, a few months before I decided to move out, termites were found during a building inspection. The building was old, and I was considering rebuilding it, but my son was too busy with work, and I hadn't had the chance to discuss it with him. I had informed the other tenants in advance, and they had all agreed to move out. As it was my responsibility, I covered the moving costs, and there were no issues. Despite the mass departure of tenants, my son and daughter-in-law hadn't realized the urgency of the situation. The apartment is yours now, isn't it? Whether you rebuild it or demolish it, You can do as you please. What? Both options are incredibly expensive. I can't afford it. Can't you chip in a little? Absolutely not. This conversation is over. To tell the truth, I had $1 million that I had saved by investing my late husband's inheritance. I had been saving for my son's future, but now I didn't feel that way at all. That's why I was able to use it openly as a down payment for this condominium. My daughter-in-law chimed in on the phone.
Why hasn't your son inherited a single cent of his father's estate? This is unfair. That's not what we agreed on.
Before my husband passed away, he left me a will, bequeathing all his property to me. Apparently, he was concerned about his greedy parents trying to manipulate our son, his grandson, to get their hands on the wealth. Fortunately, I was completely estranged from my in-laws after we stopped living together. That was indeed a blessing. My son, I'm sure, must have been bragging to his wife about the apartment and even the savings, lying through his teeth. It was clear as day that his wife's motive for marrying him was money.
Please help me. I've always dreamed of being a stay-at-home wife.
Well, if you're out of money, you'll have to work. You're young. You can find jobs anywhere, right? Best of luck. Marriage isn't always about happiness. Overcoming various hardships is what defines a couple. Perhaps this is a fitting end for my son's wife blinded by money, and my son who prioritized such a wife, neglecting his own mother. Afterward, my son spent all his money to demolish the apartment. He planned to sell the land once it was cleared, but the truth is, it was leased from a third party, and according to the agreement, it had to be returned after the demolition. His plan to profit from the land sale crumbled to dust, so the couple ended up penniless. To accommodate his wife's unwillingness to lower her living standards, my son is apparently working tirelessly day and night. I've changed my phone number so there are no calls, but somehow they found out my address, and I received letters from my son and his wife every month. I discard them without opening. I don't want anyone to disrupt this elegant, solitary life of mine. Outside the window, the blue sea and the green trees are shining in the sunlight. My deceased husband smiles at me from his portrait near my bed. You could help him, you know. Not sure about his wife, though. I felt as if he was speaking to me that way.
My name is Kristen. I live with my husband, Morris, and our daughter, Noelle. Noelle is 10 years old, and she's grown into a lively and kind-hearted girl. From the outside, our family probably looks like a happy one. But the truth is, the relationship between Morris and me had fallen apart a long time ago. I met Morris at work. When we were dating, Morris was a very kind person, slender, handsome, and charming. He cared for me so much that when he proposed, I was overjoyed to the point of tears. I thought we could live happily ever after as a married couple. I realized I was wrong a few months after our wedding. I discovered that Morris was nothing but a lazy person who only looked good on the outside. He never did any housework, and he just lazed around on his days off. Because of this lifestyle, he quickly lost his good looks and became as big as a bear. Whenever I asked him to help with the housework, he would yell, "It's your job. You're a stay-at-home wife." I became too scared to say anything. Becoming a stay-at-home wife was something Morris asked me to do when we got married. He told me, "It's been my dream to have my wife welcome me home," and I couldn't refuse him. So I quit my job, but I regretted it soon after our marriage. He would say, "You're a stay-at-home wife, so it's natural for you to do all this," and he would force all the housework on me. He also told me not to go out on my own, saying, "Stay-at-home wives might cheat," and I felt trapped in the house. A few months into our marriage, I wanted to leave Morris, but then I found out I was pregnant. Morris was truly happy about the child. I struggled with whether or not to divorce Morris, but I chose to continue our marriage. hoping that having a child might change him. I realized that choice was a mistake as soon as Noel was born. Morris seemed to love Noel, but he left all the child care to me. Moreover, he started coming home late on weekdays and started going out without a word on weekends. I suspected he was cheating, and it didn't take long to find out it was true. Morris was having an affair, but didn't even bother to hide his mobile phone. I often saw texts from someone named Donna. Perhaps Morris wanted to flaunt his affair to me. When I asked, "Who's Donna?" Morris smirked and said, "You're better off not knowing. Divorcing now would be hard on Noel. And besides, Kristen, you have no way to make money." I knew Morris was cheating, but I couldn't pursue it any further. Exhausted from daily housework and childcare, I began to feel worthless. I felt so worthless that I even thought it was natural for Morris to cheat on me. I was very depressed at that time. I also hesitated to take Noel's father away from her, as Morris said, and above all, I had no qualifications or skills. I was hired by the company I worked for before marriage thanks to being a fresh graduate. But I felt that finding a new job after not working for a while would be difficult. When Noel got a little older, I asked Morris if I could work part-time. I wanted to divorce Morris, and I wanted to gain the ability to earn money on my own. But Morris was furious at this suggestion. "You're planning to cheat on me if you go out. I won't let Kristen go out at all. And it would be pitiful to Noel if you work without taking care of her," he yelled, rejecting my request. My parents had passed away early, and being an only child, I had no one to turn to. I didn't have the courage to make the decision to divorce Morris in an environment where I wasn't even allowed to go out freely. So, I started doing something without Morris finding out. Then one day, I received news that my father-in-law had collapsed and was hospitalized. Father-in-law had been living alone since my mother-in-law passed away. Morris allowed me to visit father-in-law, so I went to see him almost every day. I won't deny that I wanted to go out, but I genuinely cared for father-in-law. Father-in-law was a very gentle person, like a sage. Even after we were married, he always looked out for me, saying, "Morris can be selfish, so it must be hard for you, Kristen." Father-in-law always welcomed me and Noel with joy when we visited him. Imagining parting with father-in-law, who was getting weaker every day, I would tear up. And father-in-law would always smile and say, "It's okay. I'm just going to where my wife is waiting." When Noel was little, father-in-law often came to visit me when I was feeling overwhelmed. He took good care of Noel and even told me, "If life with Morris is hard, you should divorce him anytime." When father-in-law's condition became critical, Morris brought someone home. Who is this?" In the middle of a weekday, while Noel was still at school, Morris brought home a young woman. Morris introduced her with pride. "This is Donna, my mistress." I was dumbfounded, wondering why he would bring his mistress home when he knew I was there. Donna smiled and said, "Nice to meet you." I was irritated, but I asked Morris, "What's going on?" And he casually replied, "I'm thinking of divorcing you, so I thought Kristen might want to know what my mistress looks like. I don't feel attracted to you anymore, so take Noel and leave. I'm going to marry Donna." Why all of a sudden? I already knew that Morris didn't see me as a woman. I couldn't understand why he decided to divorce me at this timing. Morris grinned like a devil. Because my father is going to die soon. If I don't divorce you now, I'll have to share the inheritance with you when I do. Father-in-law was a landowner and had worked for a large corporation until he retired. So he had considerable wealth. I understood why Morris would want a large inheritance, but I never thought he would push for a divorce just because he didn't want to share it with me. Morris never visited father-in-law in the hospital. He always said, "I wish my father would die soon and give me the money." I was always angry at these words because I cared for father-in-law. But when Morris said he wanted to divorce me to keep all the inheritance, my pent-up anger exploded. Fine, let's divorce. Noelle and I will leave tonight. You and Donna be happy, I said with a smile and quickly began to pack. Morris was stunned. Finally, he asked anxiously, "Are you really okay with divorcing?" "I'm just doing what Morris said," I replied with a smile and filled out the divorce papers Morris had prepared. "Hey, Kristen, how can you divorce so easily? You don't have any qualifications and you can't work." Morris was clearly flustered by my calm demeanor. He must have thought I would cry and beg him. Looking at the confused Morris, I laughed and said, "I'm earning enough. I've been writing essay comics. I've been published and received a lot of royalties." Morris said, "What?" looking puzzled. So I handed him and Donna one of my essay comics. The comic detailed all the various things my husband had done. The something I had started doing without Morris finding out was uploading these comics to social media. I had always loved drawing and thought I could make a living with my illustration skills. Reading the essay comic, Morris began to tremble and shouted, "What is this? You're the worst for drawing me without permission." "I think I'm better than someone who wants to divorce to monopolize their parents' inheritance," I replied firmly. Morris opened his mouth to say something else, but Donna spoke first. Is this true?" Reading the essay comic, Donna's face turned pale. I smiled broadly and nodded. Yes, Morris is the kind of person who locks his wife in the house and doesn't let her out. He barely gives enough for living expenses, and he tells me to pay for our child's hospital bills from that. When I run out and ask for more, he yells at me for wasting money. As I explained the page Donna was reading, confirming that the essay comic was true, Donna said, "Wait, let me think about the marriage," and left the house. Morris tripped and fell as he stood up, shouting, "Donna, wait for me!" He hit his head and groaned in pain. His reaction was so funny that I couldn't help but laugh. Morris turned bright red and yelled, "It's all your fault!" before running after Donna. In his haste, he left the divorce papers behind, so I decided to submit them myself. I explained the situation to Noelle when she came home, and we left. Noelle understood that we were divorcing and that she wouldn't see Morris anymore, but she was more worried about not seeing father-in-law.
"Can't we visit Grandpa anymore?"
"I think it's fine to visit Grandpa as usual since your father probably won't go there," I answered, and Noelle looked genuinely happy. After submitting the divorce papers at the courthouse, Noelle and I, having nowhere else to go, visited father-in-law. We asked if we could live with him until we found a place to rent, and father-in-law immediately agreed. He apologized for Morris's behavior, saying, "My son has done something truly inexcusable." Within a month, father-in-law passed away. Noel and I were grieving, but Morris's constant anger towards me was a real nuisance. Apparently, Donna had left him because of the essay comic, and he was angry, saying, "It's your fault." But he also bragged, "Now all of my father's inheritance is mine." I was disgusted with myself for ever marrying such a person. A few days after father-in-law's death, Morris called me at lunchtime. "Hey, you must have deceived my father." I had no idea what he was talking about and asked, "What do you mean?" "My father gave away all his inheritance, and he left a will saying that the only thing he kept, the house, goes to Kristen." I was shocked by father-in-law's will, and Morris yelled, "Come here now!" When I rushed to the house, I found Morris and a lawyer in the messy home, left untidy since there was no one to clean. The will shown to me by the lawyer indeed stated that the house was left to me, and father-in-law had left me a letter. "Kristen, I'm truly sorry for the trouble Morris has caused. I've donated all the inheritance, but I want to leave the house to you. Please accept it as my small way of making amends for raising a child like Morris. Thank you for everything." Morris had read the letter and even accused me. "Were you having an affair with my father?" "I won't stand for this nonsense," I exclaimed through tears. "Father-in-law has been worried about you all this time, and yet you never visited him once, only wanting his inheritance. You're a despicable person." Perhaps surprised by my tearful outburst, Morris stood dumbfounded beside me, while the lawyer explained the procedure for receiving the inheritance. Morris muttered, "But it's my house." But the lawyer told him, "Legally, this house belongs to Kristen," and he was left speechless. Noel and I had planned to find a rental and move, but we decided to live in the house that father-in-law had left us. Life with Noel was peaceful, and she seemed happy. I had endured the marriage for Noel's sake, but I regretted not divorcing sooner. As for Morris, he was later arrested. He had broken up with Donna, but then became a stalker. He followed Donna, begging her to marry him, and he even broke into her house. This led to legal trouble, and he was forced to resign from his job. Morris lost his job and Donna due to a restraining order. He managed to rent a small apartment room after selling the house we had lived in, but he struggled to find work. The reason I knew this was because Morris had broken into the house I had inherited. Living a poor life in his apartment, Morris broke a window to enter crying, "Help me, Kristen!" I immediately turned him over to the police. It seems that Morris, who is on probation, will now face actual imprisonment. I hope he can correct his twisted personality while paying for his crimes. As for me, I turned this divorce drama with my husband into a comic, and it's going to be published again. Sales are good, and it's already going into a second printing. I've started receiving requests from clients who want me to do illustrations and comics. Thinking that I was able to acquire a skill to support Noel without Morris knowing makes me proud of myself back then.
My name is Charlotte. I'm currently 23, living with my family while looking for a job. Today, my mother seems a little on edge as my older brother Henry is bringing his girlfriend home. She's been restless all day, cleaning every corner of the house. Now it's also making me a bit anxious. We lost our father when we were young, so it's just been us and our mother. Whenever she smiles at my father's picture on the mantelpiece, it makes me feel warm inside. I wonder what she's like. Apparently, she's a very sweet girl. Just then, the doorbell rang. My mother goes to greet them, and Henry and his girlfriend entered our house. Henry's girlfriend is a striking beauty, and he introduces her, blushing slightly. Nice to meet you. I'm Emmy. Our mother is visibly excited about Henry bringing such a beautiful woman home. We all sit down and start making small talk over tea. What do you do, Charlotte? At the moment, nothing. I'm job hunting. For a moment, I felt as if Emmy glared at me for a split second. When my mother left her seat to refill our teacups and Henry went to the restroom, we were left alone. I sensed Emmy scan me from my head to toe, like she was measuring my worth. Feeling the tense atmosphere, I thought of lightening the mood with a different topic. I heard you've never worked before. Is that true? Don't you feel embarrassed to be living off your mother at 23? Are you not planning to work? How do you even support yourself now? She bombarded me with questions before I could even change the subject. Seems like her sharp gaze that I sensed earlier wasn't just my imagination. She must be worried about me being jobless. She's considering getting married to my brother, so her being worried isn't out of the ordinary, I guess. I do plan to work. Plan to? Do you think you can get a job that easily? You don't look like someone who can easily land a job. And will you continue living here even after you start working? What are you two talking about? Just some girls talk. The moment Henry returns, Emmy blatantly changes her attitude. I suppose it could be seen as a typical conversation between women. She glares at me threateningly, gripping my brother's arm. It's clear we won't get along, and I guess she's not interested in getting along with me either. I started cleaning up with my mother after the two of them left. She's a cheerful girl, wasn't she? Yeah. I can't believe that Henry's getting married to a girl as beautiful and as sweet as her. Yeah. Seeing my mother happy, I couldn't bring myself to tell her about Emmy's behavior when we were alone. I'm not sure if she treated me like that because she didn't like me, or if that's just how she is. Is it because I'm not as attractive as her? Should I talk to Henry about this? But I don't want to cause a rift between them because of me. Maybe I'm just overthinking. We still don't know each other well, and things might change once I start working. The reason I'm not working is because I've been taking care of my grandmother. After earning my nursing certification from a vocational school, I decided to take care of my grandmother instead of working. Being raised by a single mother, my relatives and grandmother always took good care of us. I wasn't upset about having to take care of my grandmother after graduation. In fact, I always wanted to look after her. Everyone was supportive and appreciative, and it wasn't just on me. My grandmother passed away a few months ago. After sorting out my grandparents' paperwork and getting my driver's license, I began job hunting. Fortunately, I found a job quickly. Then I got a message from Henry saying, I'm planning to marry Emmy in 6 months. I hadn't spoken to Emmy since their visit, and the thought of having to deal with her in the future was daunting. My mother attended a meeting between both families and returned with a smile saying her parents were nice and it was a pleasant meeting. Henry is busy with work, so they'll register their marriage first, but they plan to hold the wedding ceremony in 6 months. The awkwardness between Emmy and I remained, but Henry's marriage was still a great news to me. My mother and I went shopping and bought matching dishware as a gift. The wedding day approached. I received a text from Henry. Emmy wanted to hang out with me, just the two of us, and asked when I was available. Although I wanted to refuse, I also wanted to improve my relationship with Emmy, so I told him when I was off and agreed to have her over. I would have preferred a day when my mother was also free, but unfortunately we didn't have any day off together for the next couple of weeks. When I told my mother about it, she went out and bought my favorite food for me to have with Emmy. I convinced myself that Emmy was trying to motivate me to get a job since I was unemployed at the time. Then the day arrived. I saw my mother off to work and waited for Emmy. When the doorbell rang, I opened the door to find Emmy standing there with a sour look on her face. Hey, come in. As I opened the door for her to enter, she let out a big sigh. You bought a car, right? Henry told me. Can't you be considerate and come to pick me up? You're a grown woman now. You should know to be considerate. Also, the dishes you sent really have bad taste. I realized that she was referring to the gift I sent for getting their marriage certificate. I reaffirmed that she didn't like me and I didn't feel comfortable with her. Why did Emmy want to meet me in the first place? Emmy looked around the house, looking curious. What exactly are you here for? I thought we should have a talk. You seem slow, so I figured I should just tell you up front. A talk? I need to know when you're moving out. You started working, right? How about living on your own? You've had enough time being pampered. It's time to stand on your own 2 feet. The condescending tone was irritating, but I suppressed my anger. It's none of your business, isn't it? You're so dense. I married your brother. I know a say in this household. I want to raise our child here. It's convenient here, and there are many places around to shop within walking distance. But I absolutely do not want to live with you. I fear living with you might turn me dull and gloomy. This house will eventually belong to your brother, so could you leave as soon as possible? Did Henry say he wanted to live together in this house? I can't imagine him wanting that. Even if he doesn't want it, if I ask, your brother will do it for me. She was incredibly selfish and self-centered. I was shocked. The thought of having to deal with her from now on gave me a headache. I don't understand why Henry chose someone like you. Does he know this side of you? Sounds like you're jealous of me. Your brother, you see, is head over heels for me. He listens to whatever I say. Your mother, although plain, seems obedient, and we need someone to do the housework. I finally snagged a man with a good income. It puzzled me why only I had to leave, but it seemed like Emmy wanted to keep my mother as a housemaid. Emmy's way of speaking was infuriating. I'm usually not the type to get mad quickly, so I didn't know how to express my anger. Hey, what's this? This bag is of that high-end brand. She picked up my bag that I had left in a corner of the living room. Please don't touch it. It's not something a jobless person should be carrying around. She began to rummage through my bag. Hey, stop that. This watch looks pretty expensive. It'll probably suit me better. She caught sight of a watch in my bag and picked it up. Give it back. That was a gift from my grandmother. I forcefully took back both my bag and the watch that Emmy was admiring. I knew it. We can't be friends. Please leave. Sure thing. Instead of causing more trouble, she quickly left with a smirk on her face. Still, why do I have to be treated like this? I cried alone, wondering what I had done to deserve this. That night, my brother and mother returned home. They brought Emmy with them. Charlotte, what were you thinking? Emmy told us you started a fight and treated her like a wicked stepsister. Emmy said that the moment she tried to pick up the bag you dropped, you shoved her away. My brother shouted in anger, and my mother scolded me. I didn't even touch her. I just took back my bag. She was the one being mean. I did my best to get along with her. I stood my ground, but it's my fault. It seems Charlotte doesn't like me. I'm often disliked by girls my age. I guess Charlotte feels the same about me. She's upset because she feels like I've stolen her brother, right? It's my fault for not being considerate of her feelings. I was mad at Emmy, but she was crying next to me. I was clearly the bad guy here. Apologize to Emmy, Charlotte. Even if there was a misunderstanding, you should apologize first. Even while pretending to cry, she was staring at me with her big, black eyes. It seemed like she was making a face that said, "In your face." I felt unheard and lonely, with neither my brother nor my mother listening to my side of the story. They both urged me to apologize. You guys really think I'm the type to pick on Emmy? I see. You guys won't believe me at all. They wouldn't hear me out at all. If I truly despised you, I wouldn't have sent you guys any gift at all. Anger and sadness mixed within me, and clutching only my purse, I dashed out of the house. Since my aunt's house was close by, I ran into her place with tears running down. What happened, Charlotte? Why are you crying so much? What's going on? My aunt let me into her house, rubbing my back as she listened to what I had to say. Oh my, she sounds like the epitome of a nasty woman. Even my mother and brother, they don't believe me. If I go back, Emmy will be there. I don't want to go home anymore. They must have been convinced by her. If you don't want to go home, you can stay here. I'm just by myself here anyway. Do you believe me, Auntie? Of course, you're always kind and considerate of others. You would never say or do things to hurt others. As I was talking with my aunt, my phone began to vibrate. It was a call from an unsaved number. I had a bad feeling about it and was hesitant to answer, but my aunt said, "It might be that woman. Why don't you try answering it?" So I nodded, put the call on speaker so my aunt could hear, and picked up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Probably she got my number from Henry when she said she'd come to visit. I wasn't up for it, but decided to speak anyway.
Where are you?
My aunt put her index finger to her lips, signaling me to keep quiet. At a hotel. I responded with the bare minimum.
Well, do you get it now? No one believes you. Even your mother believes me. I'm so lucky to have such a kind mother-in-law. Since then, they've both been comforting me. They were so angry with you, saying what a terrible person you are.
The revelation of Emmy's true nature triggered my aunt, her eyes wide with delight. I was upset about the fact that my mother and brother didn't believe me, but seeing my aunt react this way made me want to expose more of Emmy's true side. That's fine, there's no denying that I'm two-faced. Admitting my own faults made me feel less guilty and ready to fight back. Having my aunt right next to me mentally helped me great. Emmy, you mentioned you wanted to live in that house, right? Did you know that the house is actually under my name? It was originally my grandmother's, but I inherited it. So I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to live in my childhood home for the rest of my life.
What? Stop lying. I've never heard anything about this.
I had no reason to tell you. You can ask my brother if you want. Emmy hung up on me after I said that. Well, that's interesting. Women like her are careful about who to pick on. She knows how to act in front of your brother and mother. So my brother really doesn't know her true nature, huh? He wouldn't have chosen her if he did. But she seems to be careless. She'll slip up sooner or later. If I step in, I might worsen your situation, so let's just see how things go for a while. After discussing with my mother, I decided to live with my aunt for a while. Some time had passed since Emmy's outburst and she called me again.
So it seems like the house really is under your name. I don't get it. Does this mean that Henry received the inheritance money? I haven't heard any of this.
I have no reason to tell you because it has nothing to do with you. By the way, my brother hasn't inherited anything. I plan to get married to my current boyfriend and live in my childhood home. It's located in a good neighborhood, great for raising kids, and has everything within walking distance.
You have a boyfriend? I'm surprised. That house doesn't suit you. From the moment I saw you, I've been bothered by you. You're really getting in my way. In fact, I hate you.
This is the first time we've agreed on something. I absolutely despise you two.
Don't you dare show your face at my wedding. Even if you do come, I'll make things even worse for you. I'll tell Henry and your mother that you're not coming to the wedding. A sister who skips her brother's wedding. I'm looking forward to hearing all sorts of things about you at the ceremony.
God knows what she'll do if I said I'd attend the ceremony. I was starting to feel like I could care less about the whole thing. I answered with a sigh. Fine, as you wish. I won't attend your wedding. Do as you please. I hung up the phone. And I was hit with a wave of exhaustion. Don't worry, love. My aunt scooted to my side right before I knew it. She seemed to have been watching the whole time. Were you told not to come to the wedding? Yeah, but I can't just accept that, right? No, let's respect the bride's wishes. Leave it to me. It's probably best not to look at any text from your mother or brother for a while, especially on the wedding day. She gave a warm smile. On the day of the wedding, I received incessant calls from my mother and brother, but I didn't even look at their texts. I figured they must be criticizing me, fueled by Emmy's words, blaming me for not attending the wedding, so I turned off my phone. I'm home. Huh? Aunt, aren't you supposed to be at the wedding? She returned home in her casual clothes. She definitely didn't look like someone who had just come from a wedding. With you not attending, there's no way I could. Our whole family decided to decline the invitation to their wedding. While I was listening to my aunt's story, the doorbell unexpectedly rang. I went to the front door and saw my mother. She was dressed in a formal gown. Charlotte, I was wrong. I'm sorry. My mother apologized to me with a tired look on her face. When my aunt invited my mother inside, my aunt excitedly asked about the wedding. It seemed like Emmy knew the entire family from my brother's side would be absent, but she kept it a secret from my brother and my mother. My brother and my mother apparently had no idea that their entire family would be absent until today. They were astonished when they arrived at the venue. It looked like Emmy was using this as an excuse to sever her relationship with our family, but since it was a wedding, many guests were friends and people from work, and there were quite a few eyebrows raised at the fact that my mother was the only person attending from the groom's side. The ceremony went on amidst the unusual atmosphere. In the midst of this, Emmy, who was supposed to be receiving all the love and blessings, couldn't bear being whispered about on her big day and got into a fight with my brother. Having heard Emmy's incoherent slander about me, my mother seemed to have understood that I was telling the truth. The wedding ended with the atmosphere at its worst. While my aunt was explaining the situation to my mother, a call came in from Emmy. I put the call on speaker.
What the hell is going on?
The moment I picked up the phone, Emmy's loud voice pierced my ears. What's the matter, Emmy? Why are you shouting?
You orchestrated this, did you? You wicked bastard. You ruined my wedding.
I didn't do anything. You're the one who said that I was a nuisance and that I shouldn't come to the wedding, right? I just consulted with my aunt about it. Both of my parents' families have been around each other for long, and all of our relatives get along very well. Didn't you know that? This time, my aunt had spread the news to all our relatives. Many of the relatives were very fond of me as I used to take care of my grandmother. They didn't want to attend the wedding of a bride who tried to belittle me, so it seems they all decided to not show up to the wedding.
What the hell? This is too unacceptable. I'm going to make you pay for this.
Why should I? You're the one who treated me like a nuisance.
You are not working and staying at home, yet you are thanked and loved by everyone around you. You're nothing more than a basic chick who puts in no effort to stay well dressed, yet you own things like branded bags and expensive watches, and they don't even suit you at all. Now, the least you can do is cooperate with me a little bit.
Didn't you hear that I was not working due to some circumstances? I don't want to be around someone with an attitude like yours.
I don't care about what you have going on. You're always living your best life. It's not fair.
Emmy, is what you just said true?
Henry, why are you here?
Emmy, my sister-in-law, was flustered by the sudden sound of my brother's voice. Mid-conversation, Henry had come to visit our aunt's house and had been silently listening to our conversation. Is that how you've been feeling this whole time? What you said about Charlotte was all lies, wasn't it?
No, it's not like that.
Henry pulled out a watch from his pocket. It belonged to me. That's Grandma's watch. Why do you have it, Henry? It was in our house. I never lent it to Emmy. I nodded in agreement. Since I was staying at my aunt's house, I probably hadn't noticed that the watch was missing. When Emmy noticed the watch, she seemed to be perplexed, but I didn't expect her to have stolen it.
I'm sorry, Henry. It was a spur of the moment thing. I was jealous of Charlotte. I'm truly sorry.
Emma apologized to Henry. Emmy, could you also apologize to me for telling me to leave my parents' house, for trying to turn my mother into a housekeeper, for talking smack about me behind my back to my mother and brother, for stealing, and for treating me as if I'm unworthy of respect? Please apologize for all of it. Emmy, it seemed, was too prideful to apologize to me, so she ended the call with a scream. My brother and mother apologized to me. They apologized for not believing me. They both seemed to have received cold stares at the wedding, and having them apologize to me made me feel much better. After that, Emmy was brought by her parents to apologize. Henry filed a divorce from her. She came crying to me while apologizing to me, but I firmly refused her. Henry's intention to divorce was firm, and their marriage, which had not even lasted a year, came to an end. Emmy was also found to have been stealing at work, which turned into a major issue, and she lost her job. I heard rumors that she got in trouble with the police, but I'm not sure it's true or not. As for me, my life's back to normal, and I occasionally visit my relatives. I bragged to Emmy that I had a boyfriend, but in reality, I have no love interest, and I'm now being pestered by my aunt about it.
Ready to move out? My husband, looking at me as if I've outlived my usefulness, confronted me. Treated like an ATM, now he was kicking me out of the house. Why must it always be me who suffers? Vowing revenge, I agreed to leave. But this was part of my plan to retaliate. My name is Nancy, aged 46. I work at the City Hall as a civil servant. After graduating from a community college, I have devoted myself to my job for 25 years. I got married to my husband, Bob, when I was 25. We had a shotgun wedding and had a boy the next year. Our son is now a college student. He moved out to attend a local university. To be honest, our marital relationship is not so good. Our relationship has gotten even colder since our son left. We hardly have any conversation. Worse, Bob's dominance has become unbearable, like when we were newlywed. Seems like he had suppressed his nature when our son was born, but now it's resurfacing. His complaints about the dinner I prepare painstakingly, it lacks flavor, remake it, are a daily occurrence. No matter how carefully I do the laundry and cleaning, Bob's nagging is endless. Can't even handle the housework with a community college degree. Why did I even marry such a stupid woman? After graduating from a prestigious private university, Bob works as a salesperson at a large food trading company. From his perspective, me, a community college graduate and civil servant, must seem incompatible. He often belittles me. I have raised my concerns about sharing housework a few times, saying, "We both work, can't we share the chores?" But his response was always the same. "It's a wife's duty to do housework. You work for the government and finish at regular hours. You should have plenty of time. Our kid is grown up. You can handle it yourself." When I mumbled, "Our child has grown up for you as well," it seemed to infuriate him, and he even said, "If you can't handle it, then you must quit your job." Bob says quit the job easily, but I can't quit because I have a reason. Living expenses, the mortgage, our son's college tuition, almost all of it is paid from my salary. I tried to discuss this several times with him. Can't you help with at least the mortgage or a part of the tuition? But he always said, I'll use the money I earned however I like, and paid only the bare minimum. We have separate bank accounts since we got married, and I can't access Bob's account, so I had no choice. It's frightening how you can get used to even this kind of married life over 20 years, but there was something that recently started to bother me. It's that Bob has started asking me for money for various reasons. There's a family gathering back at my parents' home. So what's the big deal? Well, they're asking for spending some money for the nieces and nephews. I need you to cough up around $100. He replied, and that was the start of it. I recognized the necessity of family obligations, but found it strange why he couldn't pay it by himself. Nevertheless, I had a clear vision of being insulted as a cold woman if I refused to pay, so I complied. But from that day, things took a turn. My dad got injured and had to be hospitalized. He informed me, Oh no, we must visit him soon. No need for a visit, but can you spare around $400 for a get well gift? He said. On another day, he also said, Some distant relative seems to have gotten married. Distant relative? From your mother's or father's side? Stop poking your nose into everything. We need around $300 for a wedding gift, so be prepared. Before I knew it, I was squeezed out of several $1,000s on top of our daily expenses. Trust in Bob was on a shaky ground, and my suspicion towards him only grew. He continued to solicit money from me, but I began to dodge his requests skillfully. This only led to Bob's temper souring and him taking his anger out on me. Don't you want to contribute anything to your in-laws? He raged whenever our paths crossed. I wondered why I had to endure all this. Sometimes I was on the brink of tears. Around the same time, I also started noticing Bob coming home late. Some days he'd return with a suspicious smell of perfume, and I even found a woman's earring in his shirt pocket. The word infidelity was looming in my mind. You're coming home late. Are you busy with work? I'm not like you. I have to entertain clients and stuff. Must be nice to have a cushy government job. It felt like he was belittling the work I took pride in. You just sit in front of a computer all day. Can't even say if that's work. He laughed scornfully. Don't belittle me. There were times when I raised my voice without thinking. Our arguments became more frequent. I couldn't understand why he had to go this far. Despite me handling most of the expenses every month, I missed the old days. He used to be such a kind man. I can no longer remember what attracted me to my husband, Bob, and why I married him. Then there came that day. My dreadful hunch turned out to be precisely accurate. It was an unusual day when Bob got home early. You're home earlier than usual today. I've got something to discuss. Discuss? I asked, confused. Suddenly, Bob bluntly said, Get out of this house. Having suspected Bob of cheating for a while, I asked, You want to be with your mistress? He responded, You catch on quick, confirming my worst fears. Women's intuition can be truly terrifying. According to Bob, his mistress was the owner of a bar he frequently used for business meetings. Unlike me, she was supposedly a charming and gentle woman. Plus, she was beautiful. She understands me truly well. She has a kid, so we're going to live together here. He rambled on about his audacious plans, which I had no interest in hearing. I told Bob, give me one night to think, then retreated to our room. Behind my back, he coldly said, Get out as soon as you can. After treating me like an ATM, now he wanted to kick me out of the house? The money he'd squeezed out of me must have gone to his mistress. The late nights at work for business meetings were probably lies. He might have been meeting his mistress after those meetings. Why do I have to suffer like this? Furious at Bob's lazy and unjust behavior, I decided to take action. The next morning, Bob asked with a snide tone, Are you ready to move out? I replied coolly, I'll leave today. Seeing my refreshing attitude, Bob looked surprised but said happily, Finally, I can escape this dull life. Having a beautiful woman in the house, even if it's just a place to sleep, is definitely better. I'll take all my stuff with me. That's what I need. Otherwise, we can't start a new life. Bob, with his smug face, referring to his new life and his mistress. To such a husband, I said, I want a divorce as my condition for leaving the house. I didn't want to end up as a pathetic wife who just accepts her husband's infidelity and leaves. I'm going to divorce this man. I pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared for a time like this. Visualizing his future with his mistress and overjoyed, Bob readily signed the divorce papers saying, "That's an easy thing." That afternoon, I packed my belongings and left the house. I feel so refreshed. My husband, Bob, exclaimed loudly enough for me to hear at the doorway. His smug happiness was only temporary, I thought. I submitted the divorce papers at my workplace, explained the situation to my colleagues, and took a few days off. Since everything happened so abruptly, I hadn't been able to secure a new place yet. I decided to crash at my son's place for the time being. Seeing me after a while, he must have noticed my relief. He smiled relieved. "You finally ended it." "This is just the beginning. By the way, did you take care of that thing I asked you to do?" "Absolutely. Did exactly as you said." "Thank you." The curtains of my revenge had just been lifted. A week later, I received a call from a familiar number. No mistake, it was Bob. Or should I say, my ex-husband now. At first, I ignored his calls, but the incessant ringing forced me to answer. I took a deep breath before picking up the phone. "What the hell is going on?" He barked from the other end. It was the end of the month, a day when various payments were due. "What are you talking about?" "This month's payments." "What are you talking about? We're divorced. Where is my obligation to pay?" "What did you say?" Yes, it's not surprising he was yelling. This month, neither the living expenses nor the mortgage were paid from my salary, and the amount must have shocked him. Our family home was located in a high-end residential area. The mortgage alone cost several $1,000s. How am I supposed to cover this amount? Your salary was... Bob's voice sounded incredulous. I decided to explain everything from scratch. We've been living separately under the same roof for a while, so I didn't feel the need to tell you. I've been promoted to director after my work was recognized. Director? Not a manager? Since when? Since our son started high school, I believe. My salary is probably double more than yours. What? Bob seemed flabbergasted with each revelation. Something else I didn't tell you. I've been reinvesting money for our son's education since he was born. I now have a few $100,000 in assets. Thankfully, we kept separate bank accounts since we were married, so you didn't know anything about the money. Impossible. How could? I continued with my explanation. I had planned to divorce him sooner, but it was beneficial to keep him as a handy ATM machine. I managed to get him to agree to the divorce willingly. I pretended to be a docile woman who depended on him for money. I told our son well in advance that we were planning to divorce and suggested he go to a local university. Everything was part of my plan. After I finished speaking, Bob was speechless. How does it feel to be countered by your wife, who you've looked down upon because she only graduated from a community college and worked a cushy government job? He probably never thought I'd be this forthcoming. He was at a loss for words. Isn't it strange that he never questioned how we maintained a middle-class lifestyle and beyond? Of course, since we're divorced, I have no obligation to pay anything that I used to, including this month's payments. Isn't the condo in your name? Shouldn't you be the one to pay the mortgage? Where are you? What? I'll come to get you. Tell me where you are. Bob managed to utter. They told me at work that you were taking a few days off, but they don't know where you are. How am I supposed to live now? He mumbled. That's no surprise, since I've gone into hiding with the help of my workplace and our son. Of course, I also enlisted the help of my parents and relatives. Thanks to that, Bob seems to be at his wit's end. Why don't you work and earn your own money? Of course you won't be able to live as comfortably as before with your debt, I said coldly, and I could tell Bob was taken aback. How do you know that? Simple, just hire a private investigator. It's a surefire way. It turns out that my ex-husband Bob was squandering most of his salary on gambling. As a result of his debts, he had been paying them with the money I was providing for our monthly living expenses. Are you insane, Bob, giving money to your mistress on top of everything else? One day, I'll throw your words back at you. Why did I marry such a fool? I retorted mercilessly, leaving Bob breathless and silent again. After a while, Bob suddenly softened his voice. I admit I was wrong. Can't you come back to me? I was totally wrong. Please tell me your address. I want to apologize in person. He kept throwing out lies just to keep me on the line. Seemingly, he hadn't learned his lesson yet, so I decided to reveal 2 more truths to Bob. By the way, have you checked your mailbox? Why are you asking all of a sudden? Haven't seen it yet, huh? You should have received a bill for alimony. Bob may not realize this, but I never said anything about an amicable divorce. He was the one who committed adultery. Obviously, I have the right to demand alimony from him. But even at this point, Bob insisted, "I've never said I cheated on you." Having anticipated this, I told him, "The bill for your alimony is accompanied by a report of your adultery investigation and evidence photos." Actually, most of the content of this report is thanks to the efforts of our son, not the private investigator. One day when I visited our son John, "Mom, I have this." "What is it, John?" What John slowly pulled out was a photograph capturing Bob in the act of cheating. "You didn't divorce because of me, right? I couldn't do anything until now, I'm sorry." "Don't worry about it, John. I wanted to be of some help." According to John, he had been running around collecting evidence during his spare time from school and work. He made the effort even though he lives quite far away from our home and had to spend his valuable days off. I couldn't waste the evidence that John had worked so hard to gather. Knowing Bob, he'd surely try to wiggle his way out of this, so I had prepared thoroughly. There's one more thing. What more could there be? Have we received any notification from our son's university yet? What kind of notification are you talking about? About the tuition fee withdrawal. What? Yes, the procedure I had asked our son to handle was to change the account for tuition fee withdrawal to be under Bob's name. That's because the tuition fee for this semester is going to be withdrawn soon. Wait a minute, let's talk this through calmly. I am perfectly calm. He should feel somewhat relieved that our son didn't enroll in the same prestigious university as Bob did. Our intelligent son, against Bob's objections, studied hard and enrolled in a cheaper, local university in Idaho. But still, even just the first semester tuition fee will cost thousands of dollars. Since the deadline for alimony is approaching, please transfer it sooner. Please, give me a break. Why don't you stop making a scene? I won't have anything to do with you anymore. Saying that, I hung up the phone. Later, I heard through the grapevine that after the assistance from me stopped, Bob had to sell the condo where he was living. Now, he is living in a rundown 500 square foot apartment that is so old. Without any source of money, a desperate Bob tried to keep me involved, calling me again and again. I don't know what kind of woman his mistress is, but it seems she's not willing to help him. I heard later that apparently his mistress had even left him alone. I had a private detective track his mistress too. And to my surprise, it turned out that the mistress didn't have any children. Bob was the only one serious about it. It seems he was completely taken for a ride. Having used me like an ATM and kicked me out of the house, I would like him to reflect on his actions thoroughly. Apparently, Bob, unable to manage with his own debt and the alimony he owes me, turned to his parents, but they didn't forgive him for the terrible things he did to me and turned him away. Having been disowned by his parents, Bob now has no one to rely on and is said to be lost. As for me, I have been finally liberated from all the trouble and am living a leisurely life. With the assets gained from investments and the alimony from Bob, I bought a newly built condo. On the weekends, our son comes to visit and we have tea and study together. Surprisingly, it turns out his dream is to become a public servant just like me. He's studying hard, taking my advice for the National Civil Service exam. Seeing this makes me very happy. I returned to my workplace and distributed sweets to my boss and colleagues who had supported me. What I have realized again through this experience is that if you work hard with sincerity, you will definitely be rewarded. I intend to keep this in mind and continue living.